I found out my rival was working my Christmas shift from a text message that made me put my fork down mid-bite. Not a call, not a conversation. A text forwarded from a coworker who clearly thought I already knew. That said, "Hope Harper's holding up okay covering for you tonight." That's rough. I sat there staring at my phone like it had personally betrayed me. My name is Ryan Foster. I'm 29, an ER nurse at a mid-size hospital outside Denver. And up until that exact moment, I believed I understood how my own schedule worked. I did not. Somewhere between a shift swap request, a supervisor's typo, and my own distracted signature on a form I hadn't read closely enough, I had accidentally handed my Christmas Eve shift to the one person in that building who had spent the last year treating me like a professional obstacle she intended to remove. Harper Quinn and I were not friends. We were the kind of co-workers other people learned to route around, the way you'd steer a grocery cart wide of a spill nobody had cleaned up yet. We'd been competing for the same charge nurse position for 11 months, ever since our unit manager announced her early retirement and made the mistake of saying, in a full staff meeting, that she saw real leadership potential in both Ryan and Harper. That sentence ruined my professional life. It also, apparently, ruined hers, because after that meeting Harper stopped saying good morning to me and started saying things like, "Interesting call," in a tone that made it clear she meant the opposite. I want to be fair to her, even now, even knowing how this story ends. Harper was good at her job, better than good. She had this unshakable calm that made panicking family members exhale the second she walked into a room, and she remembered details about patients that I would have needed 3 charts to recall. But she also corrected me in front of attendings twice, once loudly enough that a resident asked me afterward if we used to date and had a bad breakup. I told him no. He didn't believe me. Honestly, some days, I wasn't sure I believed me either, because the amount of energy I spent thinking about Harper Quinn was not proportional to how much I claimed to dislike her. Our rivalry had a specific origin point, if you wanted to trace it back, and I could, because I'd replayed it enough times to know every second of it by heart. 4 months before that Christmas, a teenager had come in with a severe allergic reaction, airway closing fast, parents screaming in the hallway, the kind of case that turns a normal Tuesday into something you carry home with you. I called for epinephrine at what I thought was the right moment. Harper, 2 years senior to me on that unit, overrode the call and pushed for a different intervention first, something about the kid's asthma history that I hadn't clocked from the intake chart. She was right. The kid was fine within the hour. I should have been grateful. Instead, standing in the hallway afterward, adrenaline still hammering through me, I told her she'd taken an unnecessary risk delaying the AP, and she told me, flatly, that I hadn't read the chart closely enough to be making calls that fast in the first place. Neither of us apologized. That was the problem. We were both a little bit right and a lot bit proud, and pride, it turns out, is an excellent adhesive. It stuck that argument to both of us for almost a year, long after the actual disagreement stopped matching, until it wasn't really about the epinephrine anymore and hadn't been for months. It was about who got to be the competent one in the room, who got to be trusted first, who got to walk away from a hard case feeling like they'd done it right. We turned an honest disagreement about patient care into a referendum on each other, and once our manager announced the charge nurse opening, that referendum got a deadline. By December, we'd perfected an entire choreography of professional avoidance. We split the whiteboard duties without discussing it, took opposite ends of the nurse's station without discussing it, learned each other's coffee orders without ever once discussing why we knew them. I could have told you, without hesitation, that Harper took her coffee black except on nights she'd been on her feet for more than 10 hours, when she added exactly 1 sugar. For morale, she'd told someone once, not realizing I was in earshot. I filed that detail away the way you file away information about someone you're trying very hard not to think about. That Christmas mattered to me in a way most holidays hadn't in years. My sister Lily had just had her first baby in October, a boy named Owen, and this was going to be his first Christmas. My mom had passed 2 years earlier, quietly, in her sleep, The kind of death that leaves you grateful and furious in the same week. And our family Christmases since then had felt like standing in a room with the furniture rearranged. Lily had specifically asked me, back in November, if I could get the night off. "I need you there when he opens his first present," she'd said. "Even if he doesn't know what a present is. I need you there." I'd requested it in October. I'd gotten it approved. And then, somewhere in the chaos of covering for a co-worker's surgery recovery, I'd accidentally signed off on a swap that put me back on the schedule for a shift I thought I'd already traded away, and put Harper, who generously agreed to take a completely different shift for someone else, on mine instead. 2 swaps had gotten crossed. Our scheduling coordinator, a sweet but perpetually overwhelmed woman named Naomi, hadn't caught it until the schedule had already gone live. By the time anyone noticed, it was December 23rd, and nobody wanted to be the one to ask Harper Quinn to give up a night off 2 days before Christmas. So she didn't get asked. She just showed up. I didn't find out until I was already home, already dressed for Lily's, already holding a wrapped gift for a 5-week-old who would definitely rather have the wrapping paper than the actual present inside it. I read that text 4 times before I understood what it meant. Then I called Naomi, who answered sounding like she'd been crying or was about to. "Ryan, I am so sorry," she said before I even got a full sentence out. I caught the overlap too late. "Harper said she'd take it. She said it was fine. She said it was fine," I repeated. She didn't seem thrilled, if that's what you're asking. I stood in my kitchen holding a phone in one hand and a 5-week-old's gift in the other, and I felt something crack open in my chest that had nothing to do with guilt over a schedule and everything to do with the specific, uncomfortable realization that Harper Quinn, my rival, my professional headache, the woman who once told a nurse practitioner that my chart notes read like abstract poetry, was currently standing under fluorescent lights on Christmas Eve because of a mistake I made. "Does she know it was me?" I asked. "She knows now," Naomi said carefully. I had to tell her when she asked why the swap got flagged. Something about the word flagged made my stomach drop further. "How'd she take it?" She said, and I'm quoting, "Of course it was him." I laughed, but it wasn't really a laugh. It was the sound you make when you've been handed exactly the reaction you expected, and it still somehow stings. I went to Lily's that night. I held Owen while he stared at the string lights on the tree with the specific intensity only babies can manage, like he was trying to solve them. I ate my mother's stuffing recipe made slightly wrong by my sister, who insisted it was exactly right, and I laughed with my dad about nothing in particular, and the entire time, underneath all of it, there was a low hum of something I didn't want to name. It sat there through dessert. It sat there through the drive home. By the time I got back to my apartment, it had turned into something I couldn't ignore anymore, which is how, at 11:40 at night on Christmas Eve, I found myself standing in my kitchen making a decision that had nothing to do with strategy and everything to do with a feeling I didn't have a name for yet. I made 2 coffees, not because I thought Harper needed one specifically from me, but because showing up empty-handed felt worse than showing up at all, and because some stubborn, old-fashioned part of me had been raised by a mother who believed you did not let someone sit alone in a hard place without at least offering them something warm. I drove to the hospital. I told myself the whole way there that I was doing this because I felt guilty, because it was the decent thing to do, because any reasonable person would do the same. I did not examine, even once, why my hands were sweating on the steering wheel of a car I'd been driving for 6 years. The ER on Christmas Eve has its own specific rhythm. Slower in some ways, fewer routine complaints, since most people will suffer through a headache rather than sit in a waiting room on a holiday, and sharper in others, because the people who do show up tend to be there for something that couldn't wait. When I walked in through the staff entrance, the halls were dim in that after-midnight hospital way, strung with a single sad garland someone had taped above the nurse's station like an apology for the fluorescent lights beneath it. Harper was at the desk, charting, her dark hair pulled back in the kind of messy bun that meant it was hour 9 of a 12-hour shift. She had a cardigan over her scrubs, one she kept in her locker for exactly this kind of night. the kind where the hospital's climate control couldn't decide if it wanted to be a sauna or a freezer. She looked up when she heard footsteps, expecting a nurse or a doctor or maybe a patient's confused relative looking for the vending machine. She did not expect me. I watched her face do something complicated. Surprise first, quick and unguarded, gone almost as fast as it appeared. Then something that might have been suspicion. Then, finally, something that settled into a kind of tired neutrality, like she'd decided whatever this was. She didn't have the energy to fight about it tonight. Ryan, she said. Not a question, not a greeting, either. Just a fact, stated the way you'd note the weather. Hey, I held up the 2 coffees like evidence in a trial I hadn't been charged for yet. I brought you this. She looked at the cups, then at me. Is this an apology or a bribe? Can it be both? The corner of her mouth twitched, just barely, before she smoothed it back into professional composure. Depends what you're bribing me for. Forgiveness, mostly. Guilt, secondarily. I also just didn't want you drinking whatever's been sitting in that break room pot since probably Thanksgiving. That pot, she said, has seen things. That's what I figured. She hesitated for a second. I watched her hesitate, actually watched the internal argument happen behind her eyes, and then she reached out and took the cup from my hand. Her fingers brushed mine for half a second, cold from the desk, and I felt that half second more than I wanted to admit. You didn't have to come down here, she said, sitting back in her chair. I know. It's a 20-minute drive. On Christmas Eve. I'm aware of the calendar, Harper. She studied me over the rim of the cup, like she was trying to find the angle I was working. That was the thing about our whole rivalry. She'd spent so long assuming I had an agenda that even a cup of coffee looked, to her, like a move in a longer game. So what's the actual reason? She said. Because I don't buy. I felt bad. You've let me eat worse than a swapped shift over the last year without showing up anywhere with coffee. She wasn't wrong. I thought about that for a second, standing there in a hallway that smelled like antiseptic and old coffee, and the very specific loneliness of hospitals on holidays. Honestly, I said, I think I felt bad in a way I couldn't just let sit until Monday. My sister had her first Christmas with her son tonight. I gotta be there because of a mistake that put you here instead. That's not a small thing to feel bad about. That's a thing that keeps you up. Something shifted in her face when I said that. Not dramatically, just a small loosening around her eyes, like she'd braced for a different answer and gotten one she wasn't prepared for. You didn't have to tell me that, she said quietly. I know. Most people wouldn't have. I'm aware I'm setting a low bar for myself by mentioning it. That got an actual laugh out of her, short and surprised, like it had escaped before she could stop it. She looked down at the coffee in her hands like it had betrayed her too, made her soften when she hadn't planned on softening. Sit down, she said finally, nodding at the empty chair beside the desk. You look ridiculous standing there in a Christmas sweater, holding 2 coffees like you're about to give a toast. I looked down at myself. I had, in fact, still been wearing the ugly Christmas sweater Lily had gifted me the year before. A truly offensive combination of reindeer and sequins that I had put on ironically and then forgotten to change out of before driving across town. This sweater, I said, sitting, was a gift. I have to wear it at least once a season or my sister audits me. It's horrifying. Thank you. I mean that as a compliment. It commits. I settled into the chair beside the desk, close enough that I could smell her shampoo underneath the hospital antiseptic, something like vanilla and something else I couldn't place. For a second, neither of us said anything. The overhead monitor at the nurse's station beeped quietly somewhere down the hall. Somewhere further off, a vending machine hummed. It should have been awkward. It wasn't, not exactly. It felt like the first honest quiet we'd shared in almost a year of circling each other. Can I ask you something? I said. You're going to whether I say yes or not. Fair. Why'd you say yes? To covering the shift, I mean. You could have said no. You could have made Naomi scramble to find someone else, or made me come in on my night off to fix my own mess. Harper was quiet for a long moment, turning the coffee cup slowly between her hands. Because somebody had to, she said, and because I didn't have anywhere else to be. That last part came out quieter than the rest, like she hadn't meant to say it out loud. What do you mean? Nowhere else to be. She shrugged, a little too casually. My parents split up when I was 17. Every holiday since has been some version of a scheduled negotiation. Whose house? Whose turn? Who's less disappointed if I skip this year? 2 years ago, I just stopped doing the negotiation. I told them both I had to work. It's easier. Even on Christmas? Especially on Christmas. She glanced at me, and there was something guarded in it, like she was watching to see if I'd make this into a moment, into pity, into something she'd have to manage. Don't do the face. What face? The face you're doing right now. The sympathetic one. I don't need it. I like working holidays. It's quiet. People are usually kinder to each other in here on Christmas than they are the rest of the year. There's something almost nice about it. I looked at her for a second, at the calm competence she wore like armor, the same calm competence that made her so good at her job and so hard to read as a person, and I understood, all at once, something I hadn't let myself understand before. Harper Quinn wasn't cold. She was careful. There was a difference, and I'd spent a year mistaking one for the other. For what it's worth, I said, I'm sorry you got stuck with my shift on a night you could have spent literally anywhere else. Even if you're telling me it doesn't matter. It's fine, Ryan. It's not, though. That's the thing. You didn't do this because you owed me anything. You don't. You did it because nobody else would. And because you're apparently constitutionally incapable of leaving a scheduling gap unfilled, which is either a virtue or a flaw. I genuinely can't decide which. That earned another laugh. Warmer this time. Less guarded. It's both. Ask my old roommate. I once rearranged her entire kitchen because the spice jars weren't alphabetized and it was, quote, affecting my ability to relax in my own home. That's deeply unhinged. I stand by it. Can I ask you something else? I said, before she could pick her charting back up. Why one sugar? On the long nights. She blinked at me. How do you know about the one sugar? You mentioned it once. To Derek. Back in the summer. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I just happened to be standing there, and apparently my brain decided it was important information to keep. Something flickered across her face, surprise laced with something warmer. That was 8 months ago. I have an excellent memory for things I'm not supposed to care about. That's either sweet or deeply concerning. I've been told both. She looked down at the coffee I'd brought her, black, no sugar, exactly how she took it on a normal night. And something about the specificity of that seemed to land harder than I expected. You got this order right without asking. I told you. Excellent memory. Ryan. Harper. This is the part where I'm supposed to say something cutting to reset the balance of power between us, and I genuinely cannot think of anything, which is deeply unsettling. Take your time. I'll wait. She didn't come up with anything. She just laughed instead, shook her head, and let the silence settle into something comfortable instead of competitive, maybe for the first time since we'd met. We fell into an easier rhythm after that, the kind of conversation that happens when two people who've spent a year performing competitive indifference finally run out of energy to keep performing it. She told me about nursing school, about the ICU rotation that made her cry in a supply closet during her second year, and how she'd promised herself she'd never let a shift break her like that again, which was, she admitted, probably why she came across as so unreadable now. I told her about my mom, about the stuffing recipe Lily always got slightly wrong, about Owen's face when he'd stared at the Christmas lights like they owed him an explanation. You wanted to be there for that, Harper said. The lights thing. Yeah. And you gotta be, because of the swap. She looked at me carefully. That's not nothing, Ryan. Whatever mess got us here, you got the thing you actually needed tonight. I don't regret that. You're being suspiciously generous for someone who once told and attending my documentation reads like abstract poetry. Her whole face went a little pink. You heard about that. The whole floor heard about that. In my defense, it genuinely did. You wrote, patient appeared philosophically resistant to the 4 in an actual chart. He kept asking me what pain even meant on a cosmic scale. That is not a medical observation, Ryan. It's an accurate one. She was laughing now, properly laughing, the kind that made her put the coffee down so she didn't spill it. And I sat there watching her laugh at 11:50 at night in a nearly empty ER, feeling something settle into place that I didn't have language for yet, something that felt uncomfortably close to the opposite of rivalry. The doors at the far end of the hall slid open, and a gurney came through fast, a paramedic calling out vitals, and Harper's whole posture changed in an instant, the laughter gone, replaced by the sharp, focused calm I'd seen her use 100 times before. She was up and moving before I'd even fully processed what was happening, falling into step beside the gurney like she'd been waiting for exactly this all night. Chest pain, 68-year-old male, onset 40 minutes ago, the paramedic was saying. BP's dropping. Bay 3, Harper said. Already moving. Already someone else entirely. Competent and quick and utterly unbothered by the fact that 30 seconds earlier she'd been laughing about philosophy. I stood there for a second, technically off duty, technically not even supposed to be in the building. Then I did what any decent nurse would do. I followed her in. We worked the next 40 minutes together the way we'd never worked together before, not competing, not performing for each other, just two people who were good at their jobs doing the thing they were good at. I ran labs. She managed the patient's family, who'd arrived in a panic through the same doors, still in Christmas pajamas, a wife clutching a rosary, and a teenage daughter who kept saying he's fine, he's fine, he's fine like repetition alone could make it true. Harper crouched down to the daughter's eye level and talked to her in a voice I'd never heard her use, low and steady and warm, the voice of someone who'd clearly had practice being the calm center of somebody else's worst night. By the time the patient was stabilized and moved up to cardiac care, it was past 1 in the morning, and both of us were running on adrenaline that was already starting to fade into exhaustion. We ended up back at the nurse's station, the 2 abandoned coffees now cold, the fake garlands still sagging overhead. You didn't have to stay for that, Harper said, peeling off her gloves. I know. You could have left after the coffee, made your grand apologetic gesture, and gone home. I could have. Why didn't you? I thought about lying. I thought about saying something easy, something about professional obligation or muscle memory or not wanting to leave her short-staffed. Instead, standing there in a hospital hallway at 1 in the morning on Christmas, wearing a sweater with actual sequins on it, I told her the truth. Because I didn't want to leave, I said. Simple as that. Harper went still. For a second I thought I'd overstepped, said the thing too plainly, ruined whatever fragile, unfamiliar peace we'd built over the last 2 hours. Then she looked at me, really looked, the way she had that first second I walked in, before she'd had time to arrange her face into something guarded. That's an inconvenient thing to admit to your rival, she said quietly. Yeah, well, it's been an inconvenient night. You're going to make this weird now, aren't you? The whole rest of the winter, every shift, it's going to be weird because you said that. Only if you want it to be. She studied me for a long moment, long enough that I started to genuinely wonder if I'd miscalculated everything. If she was about to laugh it off or shut it down or remind me, gently but firmly, that we were co-workers competing for the same promotion and this was, professionally speaking, an enormous mistake. Instead, she said, you should know something. Okay. I didn't take this shift just because nobody else would. She was looking at the desk now, not at me, tracing a finger along the edge of a chart. Naomi told me whose shift it was before I agreed. I could have said no. I almost did. And then I thought about it, and I said yes anyway. And I've spent the last 5 hours trying to convince myself that wasn't the actual reason. My chest did something complicated. What was the actual reason? She looked up at me then, and there was something almost defiant in it, like she'd decided that if she was going to say something humiliating, she was at least going to say it directly. I've spent a year being furious at you for no reason that actually makes sense if I'm honest about it, she said. You're not a bad nurse. You're not even a bad person, which is deeply annoying, because it would be so much easier to dislike you if you were. I think somewhere around month 3 of hating you professionally, I stopped actually hating you and just didn't know what to do with the leftover feeling. So I kept calling it rivalry, because that felt safer than the alternative. What's the alternative? She let out a breath, something between a laugh and a sigh. You're really going to make me say it. I brought you coffee on Christmas Eve. I think I've earned it. Fine. She lifted her chin slightly, the same posture she used on difficult attendings, the one that meant she'd decided to stop being careful. The alternative is that I think I like you, Ryan. Have liked you for longer than I want to admit, and it's been infinitely easier to spend a year competing with you than it would have been to spend a year sitting with that. The hospital hallway went very quiet around us. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor beeped its steady rhythm. The garland sagged a little further above the desk, like even it had decided to lean in and listen. For the record, I said, I didn't come down here tonight because I felt guilty about a scheduling mix-up. No, I mean I did. Partly. But that's not why I stayed for the next 4 hours of your shift instead of going home like a reasonable, well-rested person. Why'd you stay then? Because some part of me has been finding excuses to be near you for months and calling it professional competitiveness, and it took watching you talk that kid down from a panic attack in Bay 3 to admit that to myself. Harper's mouth curved slowly into something that wasn't guarded at all, something that looked almost startled by its own honesty. That's a very roundabout confession, Ryan. I'm an ER nurse, not a poet, despite what my charting apparently suggests. That got her laughing again, the Rayal laugh. The one I'd only heard twice tonight and had already decided I wanted to hear 100 more times. She reached out, almost without thinking, and straightened the collar of my ridiculous sweater, her fingers lingering there half a second longer than the gesture actually required. This doesn't fix the fact that we're both up for the same promotion, she said. No, it doesn't. One of us is going to lose that, and it's going to be complicated if we're also. She stopped, gestured vaguely between us, like the sentence didn't have a clean ending yet. If we're also whatever this is, I finished for her. Yes, I think, I said carefully, that we're both adults who've spent a year proving we can be professional even when we don't like each other very much. I have a feeling we can figure out how to be professional even if it turns out we like each other a lot. She looked at me for a long moment, weighing all of it. The promotion and the year of friction and the 2 cold coffees sitting forgotten on the desk between us. Then she said, buy me a coffee that's actually warm sometime. A real one, not a guilt bribe. Is that a yes? That's a start. I smiled, feeling something in my chest loosen that had been wound tight for 11 months. I can work with the start. The rest of that Christmas shift passed in a strange, quiet glow. 2 more patients came through. Nothing serious. A kid with a fishhook lodged in his palm from an ambitious grandfather's gift-wrapped tackle box. An elderly woman who'd fallen reaching for a star on top of her tree and mostly needed reassurance, and an ice pack. Harper and I worked side by side through all of it. And something had shifted so completely that I kept catching myself watching her when I should have been charting, and catching her watching me right back. I finally left around 4 in the morning, when her shift wound down and the sky outside had gone that strange pre-dawn navy that only exists on holidays, quiet and expectant. She walked me to the staff entrance, still in her cardigan, hair falling loose from the bun now. And for a second, we just stood there in the cold air, breath fogging between us. Merry Christmas, Ryan, she said. Merry Christmas, Harper. Thank you for the coffee, even though it went cold and neither of us drank it. It's the thought that counts, apparently. Apparently. She hesitated, then added, quieter, thank you for staying, too. I don't think I've had a Christmas shift like this in years. Maybe ever. I wanted to kiss her right there, under the sickly orange glow of the parking lot lights, with the whole strange, complicated year between us finally settling into something that felt less like rivalry and more like recognition. Not yet. It didn't feel like the moment for it. It felt like something we'd earned the right to take slowly, after a year of taking everything else about each other too fast, too defensively, too personally. Instead, I just said, I'll see you at the next shift. You will. Try not to correct my charting in front of an attending this time. No promises. I drove home as the sun came up, that particular quiet, golden Christmas morning light spilling over the highway, and I felt lighter than I had and longer than I wanted to admit. My phone buzzed halfway home. A text from Harper. For the record, philosophically resistant to the 4 is still the funniest thing I've ever read in a chart. Don't ever stop writing like that. I laughed out loud, alone in my car, at 5 in the morning on Christmas Day, and thought that maybe the best gift I got that year wasn't under any tree at all. It was a scheduling mistake that had, somehow, fixed something neither of us had known was broken. The first shift we worked together after Christmas was, predictably, deeply awkward, though not for the reasons either of us expected. Word had already spread by the time I clocked in for my next rotation. Hospitals are, without exception, the worst-kept secret in any building they occupy, and Derek, a burly night shift nurse who'd apparently appointed himself the unofficial historian of our rivalry, met me at the locker room with a grin I did not trust. So, he said, "You and Marsh." "There's no me in Marsh. Naomi said you brought her coffee on Christmas." "I brought her coffee because I felt guilty about a scheduling mix-up. That's it. You stayed 4 hours past your own shift ended, on your night off, to help her work a code. I'm a team player, Derek. You wrote her name in the corner of a discharge form yesterday. In cursive. I watched you do it, and then scribble it out. I had, in fact, done that, and I had no defense for it. So I closed my locker a little harder than necessary and told him to mind his own patience." He did not mind his own patience. He told, by my count, at least 6 other coworkers before the end of the week, and by the following Monday, half the unit had taken to watching Harper and me with the barely concealed interest of people observing a slow-motion car crash they were rooting for. Harper, for her part, handled the attention with far more grace than I did. She ignored it entirely for the first week, kept her professional composure so thoroughly intact that I started to wonder if I'd imagined the entire Christmas Eve conversation, if maybe exhaustion and cold coffee had conjured something that wasn't really there. Then, on our third shift back, she cornered me in the supply closet, an actual supply closet, the kind you only ever see people get cornered in on television, except this one smelled like bleach and had a box of expired tongue depressors sitting between us, and asked, without preamble, if I'd meant what I said that night, or if it had been an adrenaline-fueled fluke neither of us needed to revisit. "I meant it," I told her. "Every word, including the humiliating parts. Even the part where you admitted to finding excuses to be near me for months. Especially that part. Though I'd like it stricken from any future retellings of this story." "No promises," she said, echoing the exact words she'd used on Christmas morning, and something about hearing them again, deliberately, on purpose this time, settled the last of my nerves. She kissed me first, right there in the supply closet, surrounded by expired tongue depressors and industrial-sized bottles of hand sanitizer, and it was, without question, the least romantic location either of us could have chosen, and somehow exactly right anyway, because nothing about the two of us had ever followed the normal order of things. The months after that Christmas were not simple, because nothing worth having ever really is. We kept competing for the charge nurse position, and if anything, we got better at our jobs trying to prove something to each other that had quietly stopped being about winning. In February, our manager finally made the call. Harper got the promotion. I watched her get the news in the break room, watched her try to keep her professional composure while practically vibrating with the effort of not grinning, and I felt something that surprised me. Not disappointment, not jealousy, just a strange, proud warmth, the kind you feel when someone you care about gets something they've worked hard for. "You're allowed to be annoyed," she told me later, sitting across from me in a diner booth on one of our now regular post-shift dinners, still in scrubs, both of us too tired to change first. "I'm not annoyed. You should be a little annoyed." "I would be. I know you would. That's the difference between us. I'm annoyingly well-adjusted." You wrote, philosophically resistant to the 4 in an actual medical chart. That has nothing to do with my emotional maturity. It has everything to do with it. We argued about that, lightly, easily, the way we'd learned to argue about everything now, not as weapons, but as a kind of affection dressed up in old habits. By spring, everyone on the floor had stopped pretending they didn't know what was happening between us. By summer, we'd stopped pretending to. I proposed 2 Christmases later, in the same parking lot outside the ER, under the same sickly orange lights, holding 2 coffees that had definitely gone cold by the time she said yes. Because Harper insisted on finishing her charting first, and I have never in my life loved anyone as much as I loved her in that moment, standing there rolling her eyes at me for interrupting her paperwork with a ring. "You couldn't have waited 10 more minutes?" she asked, laughing, crying a little, holding her hand out to inspect the ring like it was a lab result. "I've been sitting on this for 3 weeks, Harper. 10 minutes felt like a war crime." "That's fair." "Yes, by the way, in case that wasn't clear." It was clear. I just like hearing you say it. We got married the following fall, and Lily cried through the entire ceremony, and Owen, 3 years old by then, spent the reception insisting on calling Harper Aunt Coffee because that was, apparently, the only detail of our origin story that had made sense to a toddler. It stuck. It's still what he calls her. Naomi cried too, harder than either of our actual families, and cornered me at the reception to confess, for the 3rd time that year, that she still felt guilty about the scheduling mix-up that started everything. I told her, the way I'd told her every time before, that if she ever apologized for it again, I was going to put her in charge of planning our anniversary dinners for the rest of our lives as punishment. She apologized one more time anyway, mostly, I think, because she liked hearing me threaten her with dinner reservations. Derek gave a best man speech that somehow involved both the fishhook incident and my chart note about philosophical resistance to IVs, and Harper laughed so hard during it that she had to take her shoes off and sit down on the dance floor. And I remember thinking, watching her there in her wedding dress with her shoes in her hand, laughing until she couldn't breathe, that I would fix 1,000 scheduling errors if it meant getting to that exact moment again. We bought a house 18 months later, a small place with an ugly kitchen we promised each other we'd renovate, and still haven't, mostly because we spend more nights on call than either of us wants to admit, and renovating a kitchen requires a level of free time neither charge nurses nor senior ER staff actually possess. Harper kept the promotion. I got my own 2 years later, once a second charge position opened up on nights, and we spent an entire dinner laughing about the fact that we'd once treated that title like it was the only thing either of us wanted, back before we understood it was never really the thing we were competing over at all. Every Christmas Eve since, we worked the same shift together if we can manage it, on purpose now instead of by accident. And every year I show up with 2 coffees, and every year we let them go cold while we work, because somewhere along the way that stopped being a symbol of guilt and became something more like a ritual. A reminder of the night a scheduling mistake handed me the one thing I never knew I needed. A rival who turned out to be the person I couldn't imagine my life without. Last Christmas, Harper found the original text message, the one from Naomi, still saved in my phone from 3 years earlier. She read it out loud, laughing, shaking her head at how small the whole thing looked in hindsight. One crossed wire in a hospital schedule that had somehow rerouted both our lives. "You do realize," she said, "that if Naomi had caught that mix-up an hour earlier, none of this happens. I think about that more than I probably should. Are you grateful for her chaos or terrified of it?" "Both," I said. "Constantly. Both." She smiled at that, the same smile from the nurse's station 3 Christmases ago, warm and a little startled by its own honesty, and reached for my hand the way she has 1,000 times since. Easy now. Familiar now. Nothing at all like the careful, guarded rivalry that started it. Owen is old enough now to ask questions about the story, the real kind of questions, not just the ones about why Harper's nickname involves coffee. Last year he asked me, very seriously, over Christmas dinner, whether I actually liked Aunt Coffee back when I brought her the drinks, or whether I only figured it out later. I told him the truth, the same truth I've told this story a dozen times since. I think some part of me had figured it out long before I let myself admit it, and it took a scheduling mistake, 2 cold coffees, and a very slow night in the ER to finally catch up with what I already knew. He considered that for a long moment, the way 5-year-olds consider things that are slightly too big for them, and then asked if he could have more mashed potatoes, which felt like an entirely appropriate way to end the conversation. Harper still keeps that old cardigan in her locker, the same one she was wearing that Christmas Eve, worn thin at the elbows now, and she still refuses to replace it no matter how many times I offer to buy her a new one. This one has sentimental value, she told me once, and I didn't argue, because I understood exactly what she meant. Some things you hold on to not because they're the nicest version of themselves, but because you remember exactly what they were there for, the night everything quietly, permanently changed. So tell me, if you accidentally ended up covering for the person you couldn't stand, and they showed up afterward with nothing but 2 cups of coffee and no explanation, what would you have done? Would you have let them stay? And has someone you were once convinced you disliked ever turned out to be exactly the person you needed? Tell me your story in the comments. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.